The radar screen pulsed with a ghost signal that shouldn't exist. October 28, 2025, 9:10 a.m. And Venezuelan coastal operators near La Guaira watched something impossible materialize on their displays. A heat signature so faint it barely registered, moving at Mach 1.8 through what Caracas claimed as restricted airspace. Not an F-35, something far deadlier. An F-22 Raptor, America's $150 million apex predator, the fighter jet so advanced that Congress banned its export to even closest allies. Its mission was crystal clear: patrol every nautical mile of the Caribbean, protecting the $6.4 billion trade corridor stretching between Miami and New Orleans, monitoring 127 vessels scattered across international waters while streaming 2.8 gigabytes of encrypted sensor data per second straight to the Pentagon. But this wasn't routine surveillance. This was bait, and Venezuela was about to bite down hard on a trap they never saw coming. President Nicolás Maduro Moros stared at the radar image inside Miraflores Palace. His generals crowded around the intelligence briefing like wolves circling wounded prey. They saw opportunity where they should have seen danger. An American stealth fighter drifting near their maritime boundary, seemingly alone, seemingly vulnerable. "They think we're afraid to defend our sovereignty," Maduro declared, his voice cutting through the tension. "Deploy Operation Bolivar. Show them Venezuelan skies belong to Venezuela." Within minutes, General Lenin Lorenzo Ramirez Vilas Mil, commander of the Venezuelan Air Force, issued the scramble order that would seal his nation's fate. 2 Su-30 Mk-2V flanker fighters, each worth $50 million and bristling with $8 million in missiles, roared to life at Fuerza Aérea Bolivariana airbase. Their twin AL-31F engines screamed past 27,000 pounds of thrust, shaking hangars for miles as they prepared to intercept what they believed was a lone American fighter testing their resolve. At 9:42 a.m., both flankers were airborne, slicing through Caribbean air at Mach 1.5, their onboard radars sweeping the horizon for the American contact. One aircraft carried R-27R air-to-air missiles, designed for long-range radar lock, the other armed with R-73 heat seekers built for close combat kills. Their pilots were Venezuela's finest, veterans with thousands of flight hours, confident in the Russian-built aircraft and the element of surprise they believed they possessed. What they didn't know was that 32,000 feet above them, the F-22 pilot, call sign Viper 1, had been tracking both flankers since the moment their wheels left the runway. His AN-APG-77 radar, capable of detecting targets 250 miles away while remaining completely invisible to enemy systems, painted both Venezuelan fighters in perfect detail. He could see their weapons loadout, their flight pattern, even the minor turbulence affecting their wingman's control surfaces. And he wasn't alone. 150 nautical miles away, the USS Valor DDG-125, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer with 96 vertical launch cells and a crew of 327 sailors, monitored every second of the developing situation. The ship's Spy-6 radar system, capable of tracking 500 targets simultaneously across 400 miles of airspace, had locked onto the Venezuelan fighters the moment they took off. Captain Elena Marquez stood in the Combat Information Center, watching 3 distinct contacts converge on her tactical display. 1 American F-22, 2 Venezuelan Su-30s, and 7,000 feet below them, invisible to Venezuelan radar, 2 Fa-18E Super Hornets from the carrier USS George Washington, flying nap of the Earth through the cloud layer, waiting for the signal to strike. This wasn't an interception. This was an ambush, and Venezuela had just flown straight into it. At 10:08 a.m., Venezuelan radar stations tracked both flankers closing on the American contact, 54 nautical miles northeast of Puerto La Cruz. Inside their cockpits, target acquisition tones began chirping with increasing urgency. The pilots exchanged brief communications, coordinating their attack pattern with textbook precision. Red Falcon would take the high angle, Iron Hawk would sweep low, boxing in their target with overlapping missile envelopes. It was a classic Soviet doctrine pincer movement, one they'd practiced hundreds of times in simulators. Lock confirmed. The lead pilot, call sign Red Falcon, keyed his radio in Spanish, barely containing his excitement. His hands trembled slightly on the control stick, not from fear, but from adrenaline. This would be the kill that defined his career, the moment Venezuela proved it could challenge American air superiority. Target acquired, engaging. At 10:16 a.m., he fired 2 R-27R medium-range missiles, each worth $250,000, streaked into the sky at Mach 4.5, their guidance cones glowing white-hot as they hunted for the American fighter. From 30 miles away, they covered the distance in under 12 seconds, their proximity fuses armed to ready to shred anything within a 90-foot kill radius. But the F-22 pilot had been waiting for exactly this moment. The instant his threat receiver detected missile launch, he didn't panic. He executed. Rolling inverted, he dove 7,000 feet in 3 seconds while dumping chaff and flares in a blinding cascade designed to confuse both radar and infrared guidance systems. His aircraft's thrust vectoring nozzles twisted the Raptor through a 28-degree angle of attack that would have torn the wings off any other fighter. The first R-27R missile, confused by the sudden explosion of false targets, detonated 400 feet behind him, its shrapnel harmlessly dispersing into empty air. The second missile kept tracking, its seeker head locked onto the Raptor's fading heat signature. For 3 agonizing seconds, it closed the gap. But at the last possible moment, Viper 1 executed a vertical scissors maneuver, bleeding energy while simultaneously presenting the smallest possible target profile. The missile screened past, missing by less than 60 feet before its fuel ended and tumbled into the sea. The Venezuelan pilots couldn't believe what they were seeing. Their best missiles, fired at optimal range with perfect initial lock, had failed completely. Before they could process what had happened, their radar warning receivers exploded with alarm tones they'd never heard before. Multiple missile locks, multiple threats, coming from everywhere at once. "Break! Break! Incoming missiles!" Red Falcon screamed into his radio, but it was already too late. At 10:18 a.m., the USS Valor unleashed hell. 5 RIM-174 Standard Missile 6 interceptors, each a 3,300-pound weapon traveling at Mach 3.5, leapt from their vertical launch cells with thunder that shook the destroyer's deck. Guided by the ship's Spy-6 radar system through a data link that updated targeting information 30 times per second, these missiles didn't just hunt targets, they annihilated them. Simultaneously, the 2 FA-18E Super Hornets that had been shadowing the engagement from below punched through the cloud layer, their weapons base already open. Each fighter carried AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles and AGM-154 JSAW precision munitions, 5 warheads total, all locked onto Fuerza Aérea Bolivariana airbase, 47 nautical miles away. The Venezuelan pilots tried everything. Both Su-30s banked hard left, pulling 9G turns that crushed them into their seats while dumping flares in desperate patterns. Red Falcon dove toward the clouds at 28,000 feet, hoping to break the missile lock using terrain masking. Ironhawk tried to climb, twisting through barrel rolls while his countermeasure system fired every decoy flare remaining in his dispensers.
But the SM-6 missiles were designed to defeat exactly these tactics. Their active radar seekers could distinguish between aircraft and countermeasures. Their proximity fuses could detonate at precisely calculated distances for maximum lethality. And their kinetic energy at impact was equivalent to a small car traveling at highway speed. The first SM-6 detonated 60 feet behind Red Falcon at 10:19 a.m. Its fragmentation warhead sending 15,000 tungsten pellets through the Su-30's tail assembly at supersonic velocity. The flanker's hydraulics exploded instantly, severing all flight control. Before the pilot could eject, a second missile slammed directly into his fuselage at 2,600 miles per hour, vaporizing the $50 million aircraft in a fireball that registered on weather satellites 400 miles above Earth. Ironhawk fared no better. Desperately trying to retaliate, he fired an R-73 heat-seeking missile blindly into the sky, hoping for a lucky hit against the American destroyer or fighters. But his weapons guidance system was being jammed by the USS Valor's AN/SLQ-32V7 electronic warfare suite, a system so sophisticated it could simultaneously jam, deceive, and track every radar frequency Venezuela possessed. The R-73 tumbled uselessly into the ocean. The third and fourth SM-6 missiles tore through Ironhawk's vapor trail, closing the distance in under 14 seconds. His cockpit filled with warning tones as the missile's proximity fuses armed. He had just enough time to whisper a prayer before 6,600 pounds of high explosive and kinetic energy turned his aircraft into debris. 2 seconds later, wreckage rained into the Caribbean. $100 million in Russian-built fighters reduced to burning oil slicks stretching 5 miles across international waters. But Rear Admiral Marcus Hale aboard the USS Valor wasn't finished. "Strike the nest," he ordered, his voice cold and surgical. The 2 FA-18E Super Hornets, already approaching their targets, received weapons release authorization at 10:28 a.m. 5 precision-guided munitions fell through the clouds toward Fuerza Aérea Bolivariana airbase like the fist of God. The AGM-88 HARM missiles struck first, homing in on the base's radar installations with millimeter precision. 3 massive explosions silenced Venezuela's coastal air defense network in an instant. Then the AGM-154 JSOWs hit the hangars, fuel depots, and command center. The explosions were biblical. Fuel storage tanks erupted in fireballs that reached 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, melting steel beams like wax. Hangars collapsed, crushing aircraft worth tens of millions beneath tons of concrete and twisted metal. The main runway split open like paper, rendering it useless for months. 185 soldiers and aircrew, Venezuela's finest aviation personnel, vanished in a chain of fire that lasted just 90 seconds. Infrared satellites orbiting 400 miles above Earth registered the heat spike at 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. When the smoke cleared, Venezuela's primary northern air defense installation had been transformed into a smoking crater. Radar stations from Caracas went dark. The entire operation, from first missile launch to final explosion, had lasted exactly 15 minutes. America's cost, $45 million in munitions expended. Venezuela's cost, $100 million in aircraft destroyed, a $350 million airbase obliterated, and 185 lives extinguished because their leaders mistook an American trap for an opportunity. At 11:56 a.m., a Navy Seahawk helicopter recovered Viper 1 from his life raft. The F-22 pilot was unharmed, his aircraft still flying perfectly, having never been touched by Venezuelan weapons. He had deliberately baited the enemy fighters into firing first, creating the legal justification for everything that followed. His mission recorder captured every radar frequency, every targeting signal, every tactical mistake Venezuela had made that morning. Intelligence that would be analyzed for years to come. By noon, silence fell over the Caribbean. The echoes of war faded, leaving only black smoke curling over a shattered airbase and the charred remains of 2 Su-30 Mk2V flankers drifting beneath calm waters. What Venezuela had celebrated as a defensive victory during the first 10 minutes had become the most expensive military mistake in their nation's history. Satellite photos confirmed total destruction. Rescue ships from Puerto La Cruz that arrived at the crash sites found nothing to recover except floating debris and oil slicks that would stain the Caribbean for weeks. Divers later reported that both Su-30s had been obliterated so completely that the largest intact piece they recovered was a section of tail fin no bigger than a car door. The psychological impact on Venezuela's remaining fighter pilots was immediate and devastating. 3 squadrons refused to fly combat missions for the next 72 hours. World media erupted within hours. Venezuelan airbase annihilated. 185 dead. U.S. retaliation leaves 2 flankers in ruins. At the United Nations, Venezuelan diplomats condemned American aggression, but their protests rang hollow against one undeniable truth. Their fighters had fired first. The United States had merely responded with precision, speed, and overwhelming technological superiority. In Washington, the Pentagon released a carefully worded statement confirming the engagement lasted 38 minutes, making it the shortest and most decisive aerial confrontation in the Western Hemisphere since 1989. They emphasized that no civilians were harmed, no international shipping was threatened, and American forces had acted purely in self-defense after being fired upon in international airspace. As dusk bled across the Caribbean horizon, Admiral Hale stood on the bridge of the USS Valor, watching the last rays of sun reflect off water that hours earlier had burned with aviation fuel and falling wreckage. His voice carried across the deck as he addressed his crew. "Let the world remember this day. Arrogance dressed as courage is not strength. It's suicide." The ocean swallowed the echoes, but the message remained carved into history. Venezuela had tried to lure an American stealth fighter into what they believed was a trap. Instead, they had stumbled into an ambush so perfectly orchestrated that their defeat was inevitable from the moment they scrambled their jets. In modern warfare, technology doesn't just provide an advantage, it decides the outcome before the first shot is fired. And that morning, Venezuela learned this lesson in the most brutal way possible.